Hello everyone and welcome to Inside Games Reviews this time around. We're the only gaming news channel brave enough to take our hammers in one hand, our hunting horns in the other, and go out and just bash God's beautiful creatures to death slowly over the course of 30 minutes. I always riff on this, but the core conflict at the middle of Monster Hunter is there's some weird dark comedy, I think, to it. Anyway, there's a new one, Monster Hunter Wilds. Now, it's kind of like a sequel to World, is kind of how it feels to me.
Okay.
It doesn't necessarily have the mobility options from Rise, but it has some new ones. It's got a bird, it's got a wound system. Those are kind of the big new things, and I think it's generally an improvement on the series. But I played a lot with Bruce. We hunted a lot together. What did you think about Monster Hunter Wild?
Yeah, my overarching sentiment of Monster Hunter Wilds, it is the most memorable Monster Hunter that I have played, and you and I have we've been playing Monster Hunter together for 4 or 5 years at least. World and Rise and Iceborne and all those other, and it's funny because I always just got dragged into Monster Hunter. I was never like, oh, I can't wait. It was always like you, Jacob, and Omar were playing it, and I was like, you know what? Yeah, I'll give it a shot. Let's do it. And over the course of time, I really started to enjoy the franchise and started to enjoy what Monster Hunter was. However, Wilds, in my opinion, is a pretty giant leap forward for a story that sort of makes sense. I feel like the weapons themselves are starting to really make sense, and they're giving you really good tutorials when it comes to Monster Hunter. Or, Lawrence, it could just be me getting better at the franchise. I don't know. But it does feel the most accessible for me. Now, I've been trying to figure out if it's because I'm getting better at Monster Hunter or if it's because the game itself is easier.
I think it's a mixture of both, but you hit on something important, which is more of a concluding sentiment, I guess. But for me, Monster Hunter is a tricky beast because it's a well-made product, but I don't know that it's necessarily for everyone. The easiest ones to recommend it to are people that are curious about it and have friends, somebody around you that has played it a lot, kind of like you described, Bruce, that's willing to show you the ropes. That's both in terms of gameplay, because it can be a bit different than normal games, even games kind of like Monster Hunter, I guess. And also the UI, just navigating the game itself, figuring out how to get into parties, figuring out where upgrades are, things like that. They have gotten better. Still not great though, still not ideal. So let's get into the game itself. The game title is pretty descriptive in Monster Hunter, just to cover the basics here. There's some monsters that go crazy, and you as a hunter have got to go kill them to protect everyone else. The game story does some amount of hand-wringing about that, but it doesn't really go anywhere. We'll get to that in a minute. But there's a raft of different weapons that all have their own different combo trees and types of attacks. You go out to do these monster hunts that are basically like extended boss fights with a lot of different phases as you're trying to fight this one giant monster. You break off its parts, you kill it, you carve it up, and then you take those bits to craft better armor, different weapons, and then you go and fight ever harder monsters, and that's kind of the flow. And I think the flow of it is as fun as it ever has been. Absolutely,
yes. No, I think in terms of gameplay, that gameplay loop that you just described is literally it. And people have been asking me, what do you do in Monster Hunter? That's it. You go and kill monsters, you get their bits, you make better armor and weapons, you kill harder monsters, and so on. The game gets harder, and you get better, and the game gets harder, and you get better. So it's, and if you enjoy the fighting of the monsters with your friends, which is my favorite part, then you're going to love it. then you're just going to do it over and over and over and over. Right? I really do think Wilds has this almost nailed, like literally perfectly nailed. Apart from the UI and matchmaking with your friends, the actual gameplay loop, once you're in fighting a monster and fighting that boss with your friends, is the best. The teamwork and everything coming together all at once. It kind of feels like a Destiny raid almost every time you do it. And I really love that in Monster Hunter.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's been some new updates. Speaking of how the experience has been improved, that really amplify that sensation. And again, this is all in the context of maybe having a group. The game does have this mechanic now where if you use your SOS flare while you're fighting a monster, it'll try to matchmake, but if it doesn't find anyone, then it'll bring in AI folks to come in and help out. So you can kind of replicate that feeling. But of course, playing with actual friends or people that you know is superior to that.
Lawrence, one thing I wanted to mention about the AI is that the AI is really good. So early on, when you first start, and you might be a little afraid because you're like, I never played a Monster Hunter. Like, I don't know. I don't have any friends. I'm just going to go in and do the matchmaking thing. And if people don't join, well, I'll get AI and then I'll get stomped and the AI will die over and over. That's not the case. The AI comes in and is super aggressive and actually really helps you. So they make the monsters easier at the beginning of the game, and the AI helps you, which in my opinion makes for a really good new player experience.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were concerned about this game feeling easier. And, if you're the type of person that was concerned about that, odds are you've already played the game and are not worried about it at this point. But I do think that, I don't know that the game's design got easier, but I do think they gave players more tools, which make it feel easier. One of the ones I really like that I think is just a net improvement is this wound system. So this is kind of new for Monster Hunter Wilds. While you're fighting a monster, if you attack a particular area enough, and this is also dependent on the properties of a weapon. Some weapons are better at this. Bladed weapons are better at opening wounds. But it'll create a weak point, like a little ouchie point. And then if you hit that with a particular move that is sort of earmarked for this specific purpose, you get this cool stun knockdown animation. You do a special attack. You break the wound and you get crafting items. So you get bonus items out of it and you kind of stun the monster. But I love that because it creates a moment. Because otherwise Monster Hunter in the past was you're just whacking at this thing for 20 minutes. And eventually it starts crying a little bit differently or moves. But these give you these beats during the fight where you're like, okay, I am doing something. It is getting hurt. I did a cool move. It opens up it's also kind of like a skill shot. Some of the later ones are in hard to hit places or they're only open for a certain amount of time. And also, this is what I thought was really cool. They put wounds at different places on the monster to allow people of different weapon types to all have something they can hit. It would suck if the person up front is just grabbing them all as they pop up, but there'll be ones that show up on the top of someone's head or their back, where really only a ranged person can hit them. So they're kind of even designed so everyone gets their moment, which I think is a great addition and really helps the flow of these very long fights.
It is so much fun when you hit one of those wounds. For example, Lawrence was hammer and I was hunting horn, which is basically a hammer. And hammers are weird because they don't really open wounds, but they definitely can exploit them. So once the wound is opened by a greatsword or whatever, then we can go in and get this really cool, fun, either stun or charged attack, and it feels so good. It's such a satisfying gameplay mechanic, and it's satisfying to hit the monster with your hammer, but it's way more satisfying to hit that wound and make it feel like you are doing something. And one thing I will say too, it feels maybe like they made it really easy. The hitbox on those is pretty large. So you don't have to worry too much about I'm not necessarily a skill shot. I don't know if I'm going to hit that with my bow. Generally speaking, you will probably hit it. You'll get your moment and it'll be fun.
I did discover some nuance. Since I have the hammer, my wound buster was this horizontal swing. And if any part of the monster was on my right side, it would hit that before the wound. So I ended up having to I'd have to scoot myself to the right a little bit. So there was some amount of matching up to make sure that the hit would actually land where it needed to. But yeah, it definitely errs in your favor a lot, which is kind of a new sensation in a Monster Hunter game. I feel like they like to be a little brutal sometimes. The other thing I think that helps a lot is the sacrets, the little ostriches, the chocobo-looking things that you ride. Now, those little guys will automatically run towards whatever's been marked as your hunt. So you don't have to navigate the maps on your own anymore. You can turn off the auto stuff if you want. You can even put down a waypoint and it'll go right there. So no more it's in zone 5 and that's 5 layers up from where I am now. I have to go here because there's a ramp there and then there's others. You don't have to do that anymore, which is really, really nice. Some people have said that reduces some of the tactical thinking of it because it still has remote camps you can put up near your hunt. So that, I guess the weight of that gets reduced if you can just jump on your bird and it autopilots you to the fight. But also, it's way better to do that, to not have to worry about navigation every time.
Oh my gosh, it's so much better. That was one of the things I hated about Monster. I mean, there's a few things that I just can't stand about this franchise, the UI being one of them. But this was another one where you're just why do I have to figure out going up this ladder if I'm above or below it, or if this is so stupid. It doesn't make any sense. Why? And to me, this is one of those things that developers would put in to force you to play their game longer, and I hate that feeling. Whereas with Wilds, you literally just hit. For me, I'm playing on mouse and keyboard. Just hit tab, and my thing just walks there. I don't even have to look. and I'm like collecting materials along the way, and it's great. So it's yet another way they sped up the whole process of going to find your monster and getting to the actual fun part of Monster Hunter Wilds, because they know that's the meat of this game, is just going and fighting the monster.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I'm okay with like player skill and planning reducing downtime in terms of like your travel time is faster, so you have more uptime in the fight, more damage, whatever. But yeah, this is a great addition because navigating that map I think was pretty intimidating. I didn't realize how much of a chore it was until I didn't have to do it anymore. So that was really nice. But you hit on one of the more, I think, visible sticking points of Monster Hunter, which is its interface, its UI, its controls.
It's a joke.
I play on controller because it seems tuned for that, but you are mouse keyboard diehard, and that's got to be pretty awkward.
You should probably talk about the controller aspect of the UI before I talk about mouse and keyboard. So you go ahead and talk about how it feels on controller, because I'm actually curious to hear your thoughts.
Okay, all right. I think like a lot of things, it is not tuned for the first 10 hours you're playing this game. It's not tuned for the first 30. It is tuned for the back 500. So you have all the customization options in the world about setting up your own radial menus that you can get to with multiple shift buttons. You can put them at different spots of a radial to another radial. You have a surprising amount of things that you can drop on those radials. You chat messages where you can customize the text. Had a lot of fun with that. Big marks up for that one. But like various even system options and stuff like that, you can fast key. You can set up item loadouts so that you can just blap, blap, blap through a few menu options, and you always have your same setup. You can set up loadouts for everything, but nobody wants to do that, and it's kind of intimidating to be exposed to that in your first 20, 30 hours of play. So a lot of the times you'll want to do one thing, but you have to dive into this whole thing and feel like you have to memorize or learn this whole complicated system that's tuned for professional players, which you're not quite yet. You just have this one thing you wanted to do. And whereas other games might only let you do that one thing, this lets you do all sorts of stuff, but it doesn't make it very hospitable.
Yeah, that is all the way around correct. It is so daunting, and this is something that a lot of people, when I was streaming this, would come in and be like, hey, I'm kind of scared to play this. And I was like, yeah, you should be. Like, it really is scary. And it's funny because, again, Lawrence and I are not Monster Hunter newbies. Like, when we come in and we're like, oh, it's a matchmaking with our friends or whatever, it's like, it's a fucking nightmare. Like, the whole thing is a nightmare to do. It is still a nightmare, and I know how to do it. It took me like 10 hours, and I don't want to do it. So all of these things, you have to learn all of these things, and never mind even bothering. Like, I'm afraid to change weapons, because if I go and try to change my weapon, who knows what macro I got to learn to play a bow or like the charge lance or whatever. It's because the hunting horn. I've been using the hunting horn. The hunting horn is like this buff. It's basically like it's a hammer with that you can buff your friends and buff yourself with. But there's specific songs you can play with the hunting horn that have different combinations for its. I mean, like, you can see all the UI on the screen probably right now as you're listening to this, and it's just a nightmare. Like, all of it is a nightmare. And I was so scared. I went to a preview event for Monster Hunter Wilds to go play it before the game is out, and they're like, okay, go ahead, and you got about 30 minutes to beat this monster. And I was like, oh my god, like I haven't played Monster Hunter in 6 months. What am I gonna, I don't even, who am I gonna be able to do this? Like, I was like stressing out about whether or not I knew what I was doing, and I played years of Monster Hunter. So it was really interesting. It was an interesting thing that I had to get over. So as a new player, yes, all of your UI is on the screen. So if you want to know how to do something, it is probably on the screen for the most part. That said, you have to go looking for it. And if you're trying to do it while fighting a monster and dodging, then it gets really scary. And you don't want to let down your team and all this other stuff. So it's like, you will start to feel like an expert. I want to say like 20 hours. You're going to start to feel cool. You're going to start to be like, wow, like I actually kind of mastered this. Like that, there is a satisfaction to that, but I don't think there should have to be that satisfaction. I feel like it should just be pretty easy out from the get-go. It's not. Yeah,
it's funny you mentioned something like Destiny, because that is sort of what it starts to feel like. It feels like an MMO level of interface and like content or UI customization. But yeah, if you don't if you don't have 20 hours to get to where it gets good, then maybe this isn't a good fit for you. I mean, yeah, Bruce, we have the luxury of playing a lot of games even online, and even then there's like texture to get through, and we have the luxury of spending a lot of time trying to learn it. Speaking of other things that I was kind of mild on, the story. There's more story, and to its credit, it's a little more formed. It's easier to understand. It's in a sequence of cutscenes where the characters tell each other things, so that's kind of laid out. But as far as the plot itself, it failed to hook me. I guess it seemed like typical Monster Hunter fare. There's an even bigger monster than anyone's ever thought of somewhere, and it's going crazy for some reason. And that reason ends up being like they explain it, and it's like, okay, that could be as cool as anything else. And then it's just kind of over, I guess. There's a kid who's very traumatized at the center of the story, and they eventually, I guess, process their trauma and release their resentment of you for going around and bashing all these monsters to death, because I guess you gotta. And that's basically where you're at in the story. Somebody may be mad at me for hyper-simplifying it, but that's pretty much all I got out of it. I will say, even though I don't think everyone likes these, there are these moments where they make you slow walk through the environments and kind of point things out. I kind of like those moments. I like moments where games let you chew the fat a little bit. In this case, they force you to. Maybe not the wisest call. But the game has this, like, it looks and sounds incredible. And I'll get to that in a minute. But I appreciated that there was something in the flow of the main story that just told you to chill out for a little bit and look at this, like, really cool herd of little rhino-looking things. I thought that was all right. I like those moments. And also any cutscene involving food. Oh my God. Incredible work with food tech. Capcom, you've done it again. But yeah, I have to question the time that was spent watching characters just kind of verbalize the same thing slowly back and forth about fashion monsters, I guess.
That feels very anime that way. And maybe very Japan. That might be a thing. I don't know. Yeah, no, I mean, this story, it's funny, if you ask me to describe what happened in Monster Hunter World, Rise, I don't know at all. I have no idea. And I think we played through the whole thing. World, the only thing I can remember from World is the fact that you had to, like, hop on machines to attack a bigger monster. I remember that. I think that was World. And I always thought that was cool, but I have no idea how it figured into the story. The story of Monster Hunter is always the same. The monsters are going crazy, and we have to defend our villages. It's always the same. I will say that the memes for this story are very good and will help me remember what happened in Wilds, which is every time they're like, nobody can beat this monster. No one's ever done it. It's impossible. Look at him. He's 100 times the size of a human. What are we going to do? And your hunter stands up and is like, we're going to fucking kill it. And then he runs and he kills it. So, like, the memes are great because that's what you do. And every single, like, they're always like, what are we going to do? This thing shoots lightning and it slaps its tail down and it causes earthquakes and it's killed literally millions of people. How are we going to do it? And then you throw your horn over your shoulder and you go, we're going to fucking kill it. And then you do. So that it makes you feel like a hero that way. But it's super anime and it's relatively forgettable. And that's okay. We can sort of throw that away because it doesn't matter. Like Lawrence said, there's a back 500 hours you're going to play for the first 10 is just like, cool, yeah, we get through it.
Yeah, and if the story is the monsters, then it's a pretty good story because the monster design in this game is awesome. There's some really cool looking, like, monster hybrid things. Some like, we got some octopus dudes. We got this weird, like, bug sack oil thing. I don't know. I'm into it. They all look and move around really cool. Just like Capcom's animation has been top tier for a long time. And it's really like at the pinnacle class here. It almost reminds me a bit of some of the better, like, FromSoft Elden Ring bosses with the way they'll, like, rear up and telegraph attacks and just bounce around the arena. You get a fair amount of character exuberated as well. It's a weird word, but there it is. You got a real crass monkey that likes to throw shit and fart a lot. That's fun. That was a fun little one. No wobbly penis this time. No uncircumcised penis monster. But yeah, the roster of the game was pretty satisfying, and there was a fair amount in there. They also have, like, I can't remember the specific name, but there's, like, a corrupted version of them too that's even harder, and it drops special parts and all that stuff. So plenty to do, plenty of monsters to kill for the price of the package anyway. And I guess it's assumed that they'll be adding even harder like master rank hunts and stuff in the future.
Yeah, they're going to be adding monsters from previous games, and they'll probably make them harder too. So like if you remember monsters from World or Rise or Iceborne or whatever else, they'll probably throw them into the... That's what I've been hearing, is that because people are like, oh, you excited for the first DLC for Wilds? It's going to be a monster from a previous game. And I was like, oh, I was hoping it would be a new monster. But either way, I think Wilds does deliver on a bunch of new monsters in the campaign. And I'm kind of a stickler for that stuff. It's like, if I want to pay $70, I'd like to see a whole roster of new monsters. And Wilds does almost that. And the DLC, as long as they don't make me pay $50 for it. If they make me pay $50, I want to see a bunch of new monsters. They probably won't do that. They'll probably make me pay $50 and it'll probably be like a bunch of reused monsters. Again, that doesn't make it not fun. It's just me being a stickler for that. I am excited to fight those other monsters in addition to all the ones from Wilds. I really got to love, like Lauren said, the burping and farting monkey, and I really got to love the squid. Arkveld, he's the title monster. He's on the cover of the box, and he has basically chain hands and chain wings. He flies, he shoots lightning. It's sick. It's so cool.
In multiple forms too. He like evolves over the course of the fight.
Oh, it's so good. The RE engine is probably being pushed to its max here. It looks fantastic. I was so impressed. Apart from all the performance issues that people had, I didn't have any. I got really lucky. I didn't have any crashes, nothing. But I was playing in 1080p. Either way, loved it. Loved the way it looked. I was so enamored with all of the different environments and even the little monsters and the way the little monsters interact with the big monsters. And when you get to see two monsters ram into each other, like a Godzilla fight, because like one monster will accidentally, walk into another monster's area and then they'll fight. Oh, it's the fucking coolest thing in the world. Like there's a few things in Monster Hunter they have nailed, and that's one of them.
I agree. It's funny you mentioned the performance though. I don't know that I had a problem, but my perception was that the game, like I don't throw around poorly optimized a lot. I think people tend to do that just if they find a game that doesn't like run amazingly at max settings. This is one of those, but by my perception, it was like I had to turn everything down like one notch than I would expect to have to. I had to back off of a lot of graphic settings that other games could handle pretty fine. So yeah, I'm not sure what it was about this game. The HD texture pack specifically just caused everything to like really grind and chug, and it seemed uncharacteristic. And that seems to be the consensus across platforms too, is that it's just like one notch below what you might expect. But it's weird. Okay, so yeah, because it still looks really good. It's just different context. So if you're staring directly at maybe like one low-res texture or a character model that looks a little washed out, you're like, well, that looks bad. Or it looks old, maybe. It doesn't look as good as it ought to. But then, yeah, you see these giant monsters thrashing around with tons of hair effects, and everything's kind of sloshing with the wind, and now there's rain, and like lightning striking and kicking up all these particles. And then when everything's like gone to shit, that's when it's like, oh my god, this game looks amazing. And you're not really noticing that some textures maybe aren't as crisp as they ought to be because you've got a laser getting shot at you and you're fighting for your life basically. So yeah, in the smaller moments it seemed to be a problem, but then when I was in the game, which is most of the time fighting a monster, the whole time I was like, this is fucking awesome. Hell yeah. So, and ended up not being a problem, even though my analytical brain kind of fixated on it for a little while. I did like the variety of environments too. You kind of get all the major biomes you could hope for. It just takes a while to get there. The first like 5 hours of the game, they dump you in the drabbest,
the desert,
most desaturated desert. Yeah. And it takes like maybe you get to a swamp second, and that looks pretty cool because now there's like fauna around. But then eventually you get to like these verdant forests and waterfalls and ice caves and magma caverns, and it's all pretty rad.
Yeah. One thing I will say too is I think you'll be really impressed by the music. The more that I listened to the music and actually really sat and like thought about it, the more it's like, man, this music is really, really good. Like the menu music is fantastic when you're first launching the game. The campaign, the music pushing you through the campaign is super heroic and like really huge, and there's lots of crescendos, and it's just like it makes you feel like this badass hero. Whereas I don't think the other Monster Hunters really made me feel like that. I didn't feel like I was some protagonist. I just felt like I was like a cog in the machine of killing these giant dragons. And in this one, you feel like the hero, and the music does just a fantastic job of pushing you there.
Yeah, it's so intrepid and adventurous and heroic, all those words you described. Lots of exotic instrumentation, too. I like that every area you went to kind of had a different instrument arrangement that gave it a different character, which was super cool. In terms of sound, like, the monsters sound awesome. Holy shit. They're weird biological guttural sounds sound very like it sounds like a new kind of animal, but it doesn't sound mechanical or anything like that. So yeah, and it just like the sound reports of fighting, the bongs of I heard a lot of thwacking because I was all hammers. I assume it was the same with you, but I just love that, like the popcorn rolling thunder of melee combat in this game, in addition to the occasional life curdling shriek from a monster. It's great.
One thing we haven't really even talked about, and it's funny because, again, both you and I are kind of set in our ways, was like, we'll just do the one weapon and then stick with that. You have a secondary weapon. So normally in Monster Hunter, you would focus on one weapon and then sort of get good at that one, and then you would use that throughout the whole game. This one, you have a secondary weapon. You could use both almost at any point in time. I didn't even do it because I was like so worried about whether or not I was doing enough damage with my weapon that I didn't even bother getting to my secondary weapon. And so if you're worried about like, well, I'm going to spend $70 on this, like, does this have enough gameplay? Like, the variety, there's 12 weapons, I think. The variety of weapons is wild. Like, there's all sorts of different things. There's the ranged weapons like the bows and the guns, and then there's a charged lance, and there's like I said, the hunting horn is a buffing weapon, and there's just the straight up hammer, and then there's the great sword, and like there's so much stuff to do. So if you ever ran out of things and you're like, I'm tired of my weapon, you could for sure switch over to any number of these weapons, and they should all be really fun. I don't have the experience of playing all of them, but from what I love watching other people's streams because I get to see these crazy weapons doing these crazy things, and I'm like, whoa, I didn't know weapons could do that.
Yeah, if you wanted to be a completionist, these games can offer quite a lot, which is why they have found a certain appeal. But yeah, getting there, it requires a time investment. It requires some mind share. You got to kind of learn the game systems and the way it wants you to play. And you got to learn its particular progression mechanics too, which can be a bit arcane. Luckily, there's some wikis out there that make everything pretty easy to find. And, a casual Google will probably give you like a whole, not even where to find something, but the best way to farm it, that kind of thing. But again, I have to, in terms of recommendations though, because I think this game it has taken a lot about what really works with Monster Hunter and improved it, but it's still behind this 20-hour wall. So if you're thinking like, I don't know if this is for me, like Bruce, like you said, there are a lot of things that make it, I think, more hospitable for a solo player. The fact that you can carry double weapons, which kind of covers like blind spots and what your weapon can do. You can have like a ranged and a melee in one build. You can replenish your items in the field. Like there's all this stuff. But I think like what I go back to is if you're the kind of person that only has a couple of hours a night or every other night, when you sit down to play this game, you might spend a lot of your time trying to relearn the things you already learned in terms of how to do stuff. It's not, if you can retain all the knowledge from one session to another, then it builds into a really satisfying experience with a lot to do and a lot of challenges to overcome. But that just it depends whether or not you can invest that time into it, I think.
I would not consider this game a casual game by any stretch of the imagination. I'm frightened every time I put down Monster Hunter, because then when someone texts me and is like, hey, there's a DLC for Wilds, you want to play? And it's like 6 months after I last played, I'm like, okay. And like I'm firing, I said, remember what, I pressed tab, and then I went into this radial and to use the heal, and I'm like, oh, like, thankfully I play with you guys, so there's no pressure. If like we die, whatever, who cares? But I would be so afraid to play online if I forgot at all what was happening, because it would be a nightmare. I would be so scared. So the only way I can recommend these games is if you truly think the gameplay loop looks fun to you. If you believe that the payoff of fighting the monster and killing the monster is worth the 15 or 20 minutes you're going to grind through this terrible UI and these crazy processes just to get you there. If you really believe that you think you will have fun, then go give it a shot. However, I am worried for you if you are like diving in solo and have never played a Monster Hunter, because I don't know what will happen. I don't know if you'll take to it. It really will depend on your personality, like Lauren said. Like, this isn't a fire it up and play an hour a night or something. Like, this is like you're gonna sit down and have a Saturday to dedicate to learning Monster Hunter tonight, a 10-hour stretch. You know?
Yeah. May not be for everybody, but I do appreciate the craft that went into this game. So I think it's like, I don't think there's any question. It's like a good game, super well made. There's still just like some legacy stuff or some ways where it's like, we're doing this the Monster Hunter way. This used to be a lot more common with Japanese games, and Monster Hunter, hey, it's doing well, so everybody learns that way. But yeah, there's a lot of come to it, which is different than I think a lot of games that have made it very, been a lot more inviting, for sure. And speaking of inviting, thanks Capcom for sending me a game code. I got access to the game early, so disclosure there, but I didn't get anything else. No fancy trips this time.
Yeah, as did I. I got a code for the game. And like I said before, I went to a couple preview events, but they weren't events. I literally just sat at a computer at a cubicle, played the game for a couple hours, and got some capture and then showed it off. Like, it wasn't like, I think maybe I got a soda or something. So just so you know.
Good enough. That'll handle this disclosure and also this review. So thank you for watching, and we'll catch you next time on Inside Games.